Emotional neglect often hides in plain sight. So let's start by pulling back the curtain. What exactly is emotional neglect, and why does it matter so much? Emotional neglect is silent, quiet, invisible, easy to miss, but still deeply shaping. It happens when your emotional needs, attention, comfort, encouragement, validation, are consistently overlooked. The tricky thing about emotional neglect is that it often shows up in families that look completely normal from the outside. Maybe you had food, clothes, even parents who cheered for your grades or at sport games. But your sadness was brushed aside. Your fears minimized. Even well-meaning parents can fall into this. Psychologists sometimes call it the good enough trap, like we're a good enough parent, providing the basics but missing the deeper connection that children need. Let's look at the unseen scars, how neglect shapes our emotions, our sense of self, and our relationships later in life. One of the most common effects is difficulty identifying or expressing emotions. Imagine this: you get home after a stressful day at work. Your chest feels tight, your mind is racing. But when someone asks, "How are you?" you just shrug and say, "I'm fine," even though you're not. That's the foreign language of emotion. You feel it, but you don't have the words to name it. Over time, those feelings can pile up. They get bottled inside or come out in ways that confuse even you. Another scar is a persistent sense of emptiness or unworthiness. Picture sitting at a birthday party, surrounded by friends and laughter, and still feeling like something is missing inside. Or imagine finishing a big project at work, expecting pride or joy, but instead just feeling flat or disconnected. This isn't laziness or weakness. It's really the residue of having your emotional needs overlooked, leaving a quiet, nagging sense that your feelings just don't matter. And then there are relationships. Emotional neglect can make intimacy feel like standing on shaky ground. Maybe you hold back your true thoughts for fear of being dismissed, or you overcompensate to keep people close, always wondering, do they really see me, or am I destined to be invisible again? Emotional neglect doesn't just stay in childhood, it often sneaks into our adult relationships too. Let's talk about how to recognize those patterns when they show up with friends, partners, or even coworkers. One common example is what I would call the invisible partner effect. You might be sitting across from someone you love or trust, sharing something important, but still feel completely unseen or unheard. Maybe you tell them about a promotion at work, or a personal struggle, or something exciting in your life. They barely react, or quickly shift the conversation back to themselves. You're there physically, but emotionally, it's like you're not even in the room. Another sign is the lack of emotional validation. Imagine sharing your frustration, anxiety, or joy and hearing responses like, "I think you're overreacting," or "It's not that big of a deal," or something like, "Why are you so sensitive?" Each time this happens, it echoes the old message from childhood: your feelings don't matter. Over time, research supports that repeated emotional invalidation can actually alter how our brains process emotions, making us more likely to doubt ourselves and suppress our feelings. For example, a study in the Journal of Family Psychology found that adults who experienced emotional neglect in childhood were more likely to struggle with emotional awareness and self-expression later in life. Which makes sense, because if we never had our emotions acknowledged and supported, how are we going to know how to identify and express them later on? I know it can feel scary to admit that you're in a neglectful relationship, but it's important to remember, our brain and bodies are often drawn to what feels familiar and comfortable, not necessarily what's healthy. Today's video is sponsored by BetterHelp. As a therapist, one of the biggest things I see is people leaning on friends or the internet for support, then wondering why they're still stuck. And don't get me wrong, having people in your life who listen and encourage you is incredibly valuable, but they can't always help you see your blind spots or break old patterns. That's where therapy comes in. Research shows the most important factor in therapy isn't a degree or specialty, it's the relationship you have with your therapist. If you don't feel seen and understood, it's unlikely you'll benefit. That's why finding the right match matters. BetterHelp makes that easier with over a decade of matching experience and their therapist match commitment. They'll connect you with someone who fits your needs, and if it's not working, you can switch anytime at no extra cost. Therapy isn't just about talking. It's about being challenged, supported, and understood in a way that helps you grow. And the right therapist can make all the difference. If you've been putting off getting help because you're not sure where to start, don't wait. The right therapist can change everything, and BetterHelp can help you find that match. You can get started today by clicking the link in the description or by visiting betterhelp.com/Katie, and you will get 10% off your first month of therapy. I know it can feel scary to admit that you're in a neglectful relationship, but it's important to remember, our brain and bodies are often drawn to what feels familiar and comfortable. Take a moment. Do any of these patterns show up in your relationships? Think about it. Simply noticing them is the first crucial step toward breaking the cycle. So the question becomes, once you notice, how do you heal? Healing begins with something deceptively simple: acknowledgement. Just admitting to yourself, yes, my needs weren't met, and that mattered, can feel revolutionary. It's giving yourself permission to believe your inner experience, even if no one else ever named it. It's like finally giving yourself the validation you've been seeking your entire life. For instance, let's say you notice a wave of disappointment when a friend cancels plans. Instead of brushing it off, you tell yourself, it's okay to feel disappointed. My feelings are important. Again, these small acts of acknowledgement are beginning to reclaim your emotional life, to prove to yourself that your emotions are real and they're important. The next step is building emotional literacy, learning to identify, name, and articulate your feelings. Think of it as finally getting the dictionary you were never given. Journaling is a simple but powerful tool. You guys know how much I love it. Writing down what you feel, when you feel it, and what triggered it can help you start naming emotions instead of just having them flow right through you or stuffing them down. Therapy also provides a safe mirror to reflect back your inner world, helping you see patterns you may have overlooked. Even opening up to trusted friends or saying something as simple as, I feel overwhelmed and could use your support. That's practice in translating the silent language of your emotions into words. Then comes the practice of boundaries. I know we love them and hate them, but protecting your emotional space isn't selfish, it's essential. Saying no to what drains you and yes to what nurtures you rewrites the old script of neglect. Picture this. A friend begins venting in a way that drains you. Without reacting, you calmly say, I'm happy to talk more about this tomorrow, but I really have to get going. That small boundary protects your emotional space and reminds you that your needs are valid. Once you've begun the work of inner healing, you can start intentionally cultivating relationships that truly nourish you. Seek out emotionally reciprocal connections where your feelings aren't just tolerated, but genuinely valued. These are the relationships where someone doesn't just hear your words, but listens to understand, where your boundaries are respected. Here are some small practical ways to start cultivating this kind of connection. First up is to notice who truly listens. Pay attention to the people who make space for your feelings without judgment. These are the relationships worth investing in. Another tip is to share deliberately. Start by opening up about small feelings or needs and observe how they respond. Are they curious, supportive, or are they dismissive? This gives you a window into emotional reciprocity. You could also practice self-compassion daily. Try small gestures like write a kind note to yourself, acknowledge one small win you have each day, or gently reframe a self-critical thought. These tiny acts help rebuild the care you may have missed in childhood. And also, I just want to say it twice, make sure you remember, set clear boundaries. You don't have to tolerate emotional neglect from anyone. Family, friends, or partners, doesn't matter. Start with small limits, like deciding when and how you'll respond to someone who consistently dismisses your feelings. Finally, step into authorship of your own narrative. You don't have to repeat old patterns. You get to define what safe, fulfilling connection looks like, which relationships deserve your presence, and how you want to show up for yourself. Emotional neglect leaves invisible scars, but they don't have to define you. By noticing what was missing, validating your own needs, and intentionally cultivating emotional connection, you can reclaim your inner life and build a future where you're seen, valued, and emotionally nourished. If this resonated, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore this more deeply, a therapist can help you reclaim the emotional life you deserve. Remember, you deserve to feel seen, heard, and alive always. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.